I've always been the kind of man who values hard work and loyalty, qualities my parents instilled in me from an early age. My father, Richard, built his accounting firm from the ground up through sheer determination, and my mother, Linda, dedicated her life to teaching and nurturing children as a schoolteacher. Watching their unwavering commitment to each other and their work set a high standard for me. When I met Sarah at a friend's barbecue, it felt like we clicked immediately. She had recently come out of a relationship, but our conversations were so natural, like we had known each other forever. What began as a simple friendship gradually deepened into love, and 2 years later, we got married. At the time, I truly believed I had everything I could ever want. But this week, things started to feel different. Sarah was completely preoccupied with her high school reunion. I wanted to be supportive, but I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that I was being pushed aside. She seemed excited, almost glowing, but her focus wasn't on us, it was entirely on the reunion. I tried to shake it off and remind myself that this was her time, and I should be happy for her. At the reunion, Sarah was immediately surrounded by her old friends, leaving me to fend for myself. During dinner, I sat with our friends, Amy and Josh, barely participating in the conversation. Sarah looked radiant, laughing and catching up with everyone, but she hardly even glanced my way. To make matters worse, I noticed subtle glances from others at our table, like they knew something I didn't. After dinner, Sarah and Amy disappeared together for a while, leaving me in an awkward silence. Eventually, the group decided to head to a club for drinks, but I couldn't shake the unease building inside me. Later, as the music played at the club, Amy pulled me aside. Her voice was low, hesitant. "He's been back for a few months now, transferred here for his job," she said. Confused, I asked her what she meant. She paused, then added, "You know, Eric. Sarah's ex. They don't seem too broken up about seeing each other again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, I saw them. Sarah and Eric were on the dance floor, their bodies close, swaying to the music like no one else existed. Then, as if time slowed, Eric leaned in and kissed her. My anger surged. My fists clenched so tightly that I felt my nails dig into my palms. Sarah must have sensed my presence because she suddenly stepped away from Eric and walked toward me, leaving him standing there. Her expression was a mix of guilt and defiance. "Eric was my first love, Ryan," she began. "We always said we'd reunite when he came back." "And so, you reunited," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't be like that, Ryan," she said, as though I was the one being unreasonable. I'd had enough. My voice, usually calm and measured, rose above the music. "Let's lay this out straight," I said, suppressing the fury bubbling inside me. The music stopped, and all eyes turned toward us. "You and Eric had this big, epic love story. Then he left. We met, fell in love, and got married. Now he's back, and what? You decided to rekindle things behind my back. Humiliate me in front of everyone here." Sarah's face flushed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Ryan." "Wasn't supposed to be what?" I shouted. "You've ignored me all week, dragged me here just to rub this in my face, and then ditched me like I don't even exist. What exactly was the plan, Sarah?" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I need to figure things out." "Figure things out?" I exploded. "You've made your choice loud and clear. You want Eric? Fine. But don't think for a second that I'm going to stick around while you string me along. Pack your bags, or I will." Before Sarah could respond, Eric approached, his tone insufferably calm. "Well, technically, it's Sarah's house," he said with a smug expression that made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I see how it is," I said, my voice icy. "Enjoy your reunion, Sarah. Looks like you and Eric have plenty to celebrate." And with that, I walked out, leaving behind the woman I thought I'd spend my life with and the shattered remains of what I had believed was a perfect marriage. I narrowed my eyes, trying to keep my anger in check. "Ryan," Sarah said, her voice calm in a way that only fueled my rage. "We thought it would be easier for you this way. The house is perfect for Eric and me to start a family. Honestly, it's too big for just you." "I see," I replied, drawing out the last syllable with a quiet, venomous hiss. The silence stretched unbearably, the air in the room charged with tension. The DJ, unsure what to do, awkwardly resumed the music, but no one moved. No one danced. All eyes were locked on us, the crowd unwilling to miss a single moment of the drama unfolding before them. Eric, ever the opportunist, tried to speak. "I'm sorry, Ryan." Before he could finish, I turned and walked out, his words lost to the sound of my shoes against the floor. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts raced, colliding in a whirlwind of disbelief, betrayal, and fury. But amidst the chaos in my mind, one thing became clear: I had to take back control. When I got home, I didn't hesitate. First, I changed the locks and installed new deadbolts on every door. Then, I gathered moving boxes and tape, determined to erase any trace of Sarah from the house. Hours passed as I packed up her belongings, each item a painful reminder of the years I had wasted believing in her. Exhausted and drained, I finally sat down with a Kraken and soda, the only thing steadying my nerves. With my laptop open, I started undoing the ties that bound us together. I canceled our joint credit cards, opened a new account in my name, and transferred half of our savings. Then I found the folder with all our important documents, the house deeds, our investment records, and the prenuptial agreement. While it didn't explicitly address infidelity, it safeguarded my business assets. At least I wouldn't lose everything. I stared at the papers for a long time, bitterness rising with each passing moment. Real love doesn't betray or humiliate, I thought. I had believed Sarah was my partner in life, my equal. I had given her my trust, my heart, and everything she could ever need. And for what? To be thrown aside for a man she once loved? A knock at the door startled me. It was Amy and Josh, two of our mutual friends. Amy's face was flushed, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Ryan," she started hesitantly, "we need to talk about Sarah and Eric." "Stop," I said firmly, cutting her off. My tears from earlier had dried, replaced by a searing anger that now burned cold. "I don't want to hear another word about Sarah and Eric." "Ryan, you don't understand." I said stop, I repeated, my voice low but sharp. "I've already wasted 7 years of my life. 7 years supporting her, encouraging her, believing in her. And for what? To be humiliated like this?" I picked up a few boxes of Sarah's belongings and hauled them to the front porch, dropping them unceremoniously with a loud crash. Fragile items shattered inside, but I didn't care. "Take these to Sarah's new place," I said flatly. "But Sarah said she needs the house," Josh interjected nervously. "She thought you'd move out." I let out a hollow laugh, sharp and bitter. "This isn't her house. Tell her not to come back. Everything she owns is in these boxes. My lawyer will send her the divorce papers on Monday." Amy's lip quivered. "You didn't even try to fight?" "Why would I fight?" I snapped, cutting her off again. "She's in love with him. She cheated on me. She lied to me. And now she can deal with the consequences." Without waiting for a response, I shut the door firmly. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages, apologies, explanations, half-hearted attempts to justify what Sarah had done. I ignored them all. That night, I lay in bed, numb. The events of the day replayed in fragments. The only clear memory I had was a visit to the doctor earlier. They'd confirmed hairline fractures in both arms, an injury I sustained from punching the wall too hard in a moment of overwhelming frustration. Monday morning came, bringing with it an eerie calm. The house was silent, the emptiness almost oppressive. But I resolved to start fresh, to rebuild from the ruins of what Sarah had left behind. This time, without lies. Without betrayal. Without her. Monday morning came, and I forced myself to return to the office. I buried myself in emails and prepared for the 9 a.m. team meeting, determined to compartmentalize the chaos in my personal life. My receptionist, Colleen, stepped into my office, her eyes immediately landing on the bandages on my arms. Concerned, she pulled up a chair and sat down. "Rough weekend?" she asked gently. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Sarah dumped me for her true love," I said flatly, the words tasting bitter. Colleen's eyes widened in shock. "What? No, you're joking," she exclaimed. "I'm not," I said, my tone resigned. "That's the reality. Sarah and Eric are apparently destined for each other." Colleen sat back, processing the revelation. Before she could respond, it was time for the meeting. I joined the team in the conference room, my focus sharp despite the turmoil roiling beneath the surface. Midway through the meeting, a comment from James, one of my employees, struck a nerve. He said something that suggested he might have supported Sarah's betrayal, whether knowingly or not. The room fell silent, and I turned to him, my anger barely restrained. Colleen, sensing the tension, spoke up. "James," she said firmly, "you need to leave the room and seriously consider your future here. If it's found that you supported what Sarah did, you'll be dismissed. Do you understand?" James swallowed hard, his face pale. "I understand," he said quietly before leaving the room. For a moment, silence hung over the group. I realized I hadn't even noticed James in the room on Friday during the reunion aftermath. My focus had been consumed by those directly involved in destroying my life. I cleared my throat and brought everyone back to the matter at hand, redirecting the meeting to business as usual. Later that day, James returned to my office. He knocked hesitantly, carrying an air of remorse. "Greg, I need to explain," he started, his voice low. "It's Ryan," I corrected, though my tone softened slightly. "Go on. You've probably heard all about how perfect Sarah and Eric were back in high school," James began. I nodded. "Lately, that's all anyone seemed to talk about." "Well, I wasn't part of that popular crowd. I was a math major who kept my head down. But even I knew about them. Everyone did. They were the couple." He hesitated, then continued. "But they broke up before graduation when Eric went abroad. Sarah was heartbroken, devastated, really. What most people didn't know was that Eric had a girlfriend here in the States the whole time." I nodded again, recalling the pieces of Sarah's side of the story I'd heard when I helped her pick herself up after that breakup. "I didn't know that part," I admitted quietly. James pressed on. "When I heard Sarah was with Eric again, I couldn't believe it. Sherry and I tried to warn people at the reunion, but," he paused, his expression twisting with regret. "We got shut down. Sarah and Eric were determined to keep things under wraps, and they had enough people on their side to make sure no one got in their way." "What happened at the club?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I didn't see you there." James nodded. "We were there when you arrived, but a few guys blocked us from reaching you. When Sarah told you everything, you left before we could do anything. Sherry and I ran after you, but you were gone. We stood outside for half an hour, trying to figure out what to do." I studied him carefully. His words rang with sincerity, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't expected: empathy. I picked up a piece of paper on my desk, something James had left earlier, his resignation letter. Without hesitation, I tore it in half. "Your resignation is rejected," I said firmly. James stared at me, stunned. "But Ryan, why?" "My friends call me Ryan," I corrected with a faint smile. You and Sherry tried to help me. You saw what was happening and tried to stand by me. If that's not what a friend does, then I don't know what is. James nodded, his expression a mix of relief and gratitude. Sherry and I thought we were doing the right thing, he said softly. You were, I replied. And that's why I want both of you to stay. We spoke for another half hour, hashing things out and clearing the air. By the time Colleen, James, and I reconvened the team in the conference room, the tension from earlier had mostly lifted. I explained that James had acted in good faith, standing by his moral compass when things went sideways. Slowly, the team began to rally around the sense of closure I was trying to foster. That evening, I still couldn't sleep. By Saturday morning, I went for a run to clear my head, eventually ending up at a quiet cafe, sipping coffee and planning my next steps. For the first time in days, I felt the faintest trace of clarity. I jogged home after enjoying a quiet coffee and croissant at the cafe, feeling slightly more centered. But to my surprise, Sarah was sitting on the steps of the house when I arrived. She looked disheveled, dressed in mismatched clothes, her face pale and drawn. Ryan, it's good to see you, she began hesitantly. I spat a sharp laugh, interrupting her. Good to see me. What's wrong, Sarah? Surprised I'm still standing. Afraid I'd fall apart or, worse. My tone was biting, and she flinched at the accusation, taking a step back. That's not, she started, but I cut her off, my voice rising. First, I said coldly, you're not my wife anymore. You stopped being that the second you betrayed me. She gulped, visibly shaken. Second, I continued, you're not a friend either. A friend doesn't stab someone in the back. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, handing it to her. Here. A check for your half of our shared assets. That's all you're getting from me. Her eyes widened as she opened the folder, clearly stunned by the gesture. And third, I added, you have something for me, don't you? She hesitated, fumbling with her purse before pulling out a manila envelope. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she handed it to me. I'm sorry, Ryan. You will be, I said flatly, taking the envelope. I opened it, scanning the documents inside. My jaw tightened as I read, she was demanding 75% of our savings, half of my business, and even filed for a restraining order. Really? I asked, raising an eyebrow. My voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the fury simmering beneath it. Sarah couldn't meet my gaze. She looked at the ground, her shoulders hunched as though she knew they had overplayed their hand. It wasn't my idea, she said weakly. Josh and Eric thought it would be easier this way. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Easier? For who? You think I'd fight for you after everything you've done? No. You lost any right to my respect the moment you cheated. Now, get off my property. Ryan, you can't talk to me like that, she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. I'm still your wife. I turned, unlocking the door. No, you're not, I said simply. When she tried to follow me inside, I stopped her cold. You're not invited. But Ryan, this is still my house too, she insisted, her voice trembling with anger. I stepped through the doorway and blocked her path. No, it's not. You gave up that right the moment you humiliated me. You and Eric made your bed, now lie in it. Don't come back. Slamming the door, I leaned against it for a moment, breathing heavily. Before I could process the encounter, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Amy, asking me to come meet her and Josh. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Later that day, I found myself sitting across from Amy and Josh at a coffee shop. They looked uncomfortable, guilt written all over their faces. Amy started hesitantly. Ryan, about the reunion. I swear we didn't know how bad it would get. You were there, Amy, I said, my voice cold. You saw everything. Amy glanced nervously at Josh, who cleared his throat and spoke. Look, it wasn't our plan, okay? Sarah and Eric wanted to handle it, dramatically. We were just trying to be there for you. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Be there for me? You helped them stage that scene at the club to humiliate me. That's not loyalty. That's betrayal. Josh tried to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharper. You're as guilty as Sarah and Eric. If you think that's what love looks like, then there's no hope for anyone. They sat there, stunned into silence. Then an idea struck me. I leaned forward, my tone turning icy and deliberate. Amy, I said slowly, how would you feel if Josh came home smelling of perfume, claiming he spent the night at a strip club? Her eyes darted to Josh, who stammered, baby, that's not true. I laughed bitterly, standing up. See how quickly trust unravels when betrayal enters the picture. I walked away, feeling a twisted mix of triumph and sadness. I had loved Sarah deeply, and some part of me wanted her to feel the regret I knew would never come. But as I left them behind, I realized I didn't need closure from Sarah or anyone else. What I needed now was to focus on rebuilding my life, on my terms. I knew Sarah wouldn't come back. And even if she did, there was no way I could ever accept her again. The next month passed in a haze of legal proceedings, lawyers, financial disclosures, and dividing our assets. It was grueling, but I was determined to put this chapter behind me. Thankfully, my staff rallied around me. Colleen, my ever-reliable receptionist, went above and beyond. She not only helped me find a counselor to process everything but also coordinated the cleaning and repairs for the house. I moved into a new apartment, determined to start fresh. Despite my desire for a clean break, Sarah fought over everything. She claimed an absurd $155,000 out of our $20,000 in joint bank accounts, exaggerating her financial needs at every turn. She even tried to dispute the prenuptial agreement that protected my business. It was exhausting, but I refused to back down. A few weeks before the finalization of the divorce, right in the middle of tax season, when my work demands were at their peak, I was startled to see unexpected visitors in my office. Josh and Amy, mutual friends and part of the reunion debacle, were waiting in the meeting room. Amy's eyes were downcast, while Josh fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair. Their relationship looked strained, likely due to the fallout from their involvement. Ryan, come on, you have to help us, Josh pleaded as I walked in. I raised an eyebrow, taking a seat at the head of the table. James, who had been helping with Josh's business taxes for years, sat down beside me. Help you? I asked, masking my satisfaction at seeing them squirm. Why would I do that? Josh squirmed under my gaze, unable to meet my eyes. Amy sat frozen, her face pale and drawn. The tension between them was thick. Ryan, Josh started again, we're in trouble. And we don't know who else to turn to. Trouble? I repeated, my voice cold. What kind of trouble? The kind you caused for me when you helped Sarah and Eric humiliate me. Amy finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We're facing the consequences now. We hurt the people we loved, and now, my marriage is hanging by a thread. I don't know if it'll survive. I turned my gaze to Josh, who said nothing. The satisfaction I'd felt earlier flickered and gave way to faint pity. I can't say I'm not pleased to see you both suffering, I said softly, watching them wince. But as managing partner, I've decided it's not in this firm's best interest to continue handling your company's taxes. Josh's shoulders slumped, and Amy blinked rapidly, fighting tears. James nodded silently beside me. They left shortly after, their departure heavy with unspoken regret. The day I received the final divorce paperwork felt surreal. I was officially free, but the weight of Sarah's betrayal still lingered. That same evening, my phone buzzed with messages from her. Goodbye, Ryan, one text read. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of how to feel. The wounds were still fresh, the betrayal still painful. But one thing was clear, if Sarah could leave me so easily, then she wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't the one for me. That weekend, Colleen and my team surprised me with a barbecue at my apartment complex. Over 24 people came, including James, Sherry, and several close colleagues. It was the first time in weeks I felt like myself again, surrounded by friends who genuinely cared. For the first time since the chaos began, I let myself smile, truly smile. It wasn't just a new beginning, it was a reminder of the life I still had ahead of me. With the right people by my side, I was ready to move forward. The barbecue was a turning point. For the first time in what felt like ages, I didn't feel alone. At one point, James manned the grill while Sherry sat with me, the two of us watching kids run around, their laughter filling the air. The warmth of friends and the hum of life around me felt strangely healing. Later in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Sherry came over and sat closer. "You're doing okay," she said softly, her gaze steady. Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed me, tugging me closer by my shirt. Her lips were soft and minty, and for a moment, I found myself kissing her back, holding her tightly. When we finally parted, I saw tears in her eyes. But before I could say anything, she gave me a light slap, not hard, more of a gesture than anything else. I stood there, stunned. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said, her voice a mix of sultry and firm. That probably wasn't the best way to say hello. I tilted my head, my confusion evident. "Who are you?" I asked finally, leaving the question hanging between us. She smiled. "Rebecca." "Rebecca," I repeated slowly, testing the name on my tongue. Rebecca turned out to be one of the most intriguing women I'd ever met. We stood on the porch, her smile playful, as if she were letting me in on a secret. "To Ryan," she said, raising her wine glass, "for showing that even when life wounds you, you still know how to treat a lady." We clinked glasses, her words pulling a faint smile from me. As she took a bite of the food James had prepared earlier, her eyes widened. "Ryan, this is amazing." I chuckled, tasting the dish myself. It really was good. "Okay, Rebecca," I said, setting my fork down. "No more games. Who are you, and what's going on here?" She took another sip of wine and smiled, her expression softening. "First, thank you for handling my unconventional greeting with grace. I stood outside your door for 20 minutes before I finally knocked. I was nervous." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting her continue. "You didn't judge me for how I was dressed or for my piercings." "I appreciated that," she said. Her smile turned nostalgic. "Do you remember what you asked me?" I nodded. "I asked what kind of coffee you wanted." Her smile brightened. "Mocha with a double shot of chocolate." We both laughed, saying it at the same time. "You remember," she said, her tone surprised but pleased. "I do," I replied, taking another sip of wine. Her smile faded slightly. "The slap earlier? That was because I was at the barbecue that day, and you didn't notice me." I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. It was a rough day," I said honestly. She gave me a faint smile. "It's okay, Ryan. I understand." Over the course of the evening, Rebecca and I shared pieces of our lives. She talked about her upbringing, how she had gone through a goth phase in high school, loved various types of music but couldn't stand heavy metal, and eventually became a junior accountant at a manufacturing firm. Her parents had been married for 30 years, and her younger sister now lived in New Zealand. She adored the beach despite having sensitive skin and had only been in 2 serious relationships, one of which ended in betrayal. In turn, I shared my own story. I told her about my father's sudden passing and how it had caused a rift in my family, leaving me estranged from my mother. As we talked, her laughter and joy became infectious, pulling me further out of the shadows of my own pain. Friday night came, and I picked Rebecca up for our first official date. I had asked her to dress up, and when she opened the door, I was speechless. She looked stunning. "Wow," I said, fumbling for words. "Wow." Rebecca laughed. "Batting 1,000 so far," she teased. "Every time we meet, you can't even manage a proper hello." I grinned. "Hello, beautiful." "Better," she said, smiling as she took my hand. We walked hand in hand to my car. As I opened the passenger door for her, she stopped. "Is this your car?" "Yeah," I said, glancing at my Mustang. Her jaw dropped. "I'm impressed." The date was perfect. We laughed, talked, and enjoyed every moment. At one point, a man, tall, built like a personal trainer or a football player, patted me on the shoulder as we walked into the restaurant. He smiled and walked away, but Rebecca's hand tightened in mine. The rest of the weekend felt like a dream. We spent most of it together, lounging around, talking, and laughing. For the first time in months, I woke up smiling. Rebecca's presence was a balm, and though I knew I still had healing to do, I could feel the weight of the past beginning to lift. I drove Rebecca back to her apartment early Monday morning, her still in her Friday night dress. She looked radiant even after the long weekend. By the time I reached the office, I already had 2 more pictures of her on my phone. Rebecca had stayed with me every night that week, and each moment with her felt like another step forward, away from the wreckage of my past. That week at work was intense. James and I had been working on a forensic investigation into a client's suspicious finances, and the results were staggering. A high-level executive had been embezzling company money for years, funneling it into unsavory services and personal expenses. Among his expenditures were payments for Corey Sands, services associated with questionable personal indulgences, and for the last 3 years, he'd been supporting a mistress and child in the U.S. The total theft was just under $2 million, carefully hidden across various cost centers and projects. "So, let me get this straight," I said to James, trying to process the scale of the fraud. "For over 4 years, he's been using company money for Corey Sands, and for the last 3 years, he's been using it to pay child support for a woman and child overseas?" James nodded grimly. "Exactly." "Wow," I murmured, shaking my head. The fallout from this discovery would be monumental. That evening, I returned home to Rebecca. She had been unusually quiet all day, and when I stepped inside, she greeted me with a nervous smile. "Ryan, can we talk?" she asked softly, leading me to the living room. She handed me a small box, her hands trembling slightly. "Inside this box," she began, her voice wavering, "is the engagement ring you bought last week. I found it while cleaning and, well, while you were in the shower. I hope you open the box, take out the ring, and ask me to marry you. I love you so much. Sincerely and forever. Love, Rebecca." I stared at her in shock, caught between surprise and amusement. "You found the ring?" Rebecca blushed. "I never looked inside," she said quickly, though the hope in her eyes was unmistakable. I wanted to feign offense, but I couldn't help but laugh. "I love you too," I said, pulling her close. I opened the box to reveal the simple gold ring with a single diamond I had chosen. Rebecca's face lit up with joy as I slid it onto her finger. She admired it, her smile bright enough to light the room. Rebecca wasted no time showing off her ring to the ladies in her life, while I received congratulatory slaps on the back from James and her father. That evening was filled with laughter and stories about Rebecca's childhood. When the guests left, Rebecca and I headed to bed, but not before taking a few more pictures of her wearing her new ring, and only the ring. A month later, 3 significant events unfolded within 48 hours. First, we delivered the completed forensic report to our client, exposing the executive's long-running embezzlement. The fallout was swift and severe, with lawsuits and criminal charges following in short order. Second, Sarah, my ex-wife, showed up unannounced at my apartment. Her yelling could be heard before I even entered the room. "So, I move out, and she moves in," Sarah shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Rebecca laughed, utterly unfazed. "You left the most loving man on this planet and broke his heart." "Yes, I agree with that. However, I am now Ryan's personal strumpet. He gets my body freely, for his exclusive use. Could you say the same when you were married to him?" Sarah's face turned red with fury, and her hand snapped forward. The sound of her slap echoed through the room. I hurried inside, finding Sarah with a red mark on her cheek and Rebecca standing firm. "Rebecca," I said warningly, my voice low but firm. Sarah turned to me, her face white with anger and something else, fear. "Ryan," she sputtered. "Did you know about the woman and the child?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "What woman and child?" I asked rhetorically, leaning closer. "Oh, you mean Eric's woman and child? The ones he's been supporting in the US? With stolen company money?" Sarah's face turned ashen, her confidence evaporating. "That's not true," she said weakly, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "Oh, it's true," I said, holding up the forensic report. "Everything's in here. Want me to send you a copy?" She sank to the ground, the weight of her world collapsing for the first time. I couldn't muster any sympathy as she sat there, her shoulders shaking. The woman who had once dismantled my life was now staring into the ruins of her own. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. As Rebecca and I watched Sarah slump against the wall, I saw the truth: everything she believed about her life was crumbling. The confidence and pride that once defined her were gone, leaving only a shadow of the woman I had once loved. She looked utterly defeated, lost in the ruins of her choices. Rebecca, surprising me with her compassion, walked over and sat next to her. "Sarah," she said gently, her tone softer than I expected. "You don't know my story. When I first met Ryan, he was happily married to you. Even from a brief conversation, I could tell how much he loved you." Sarah looked up, startled, as Rebecca continued. "Over time, I learned more about your life together, and I'll admit, I was jealous of you. I envied the love and devotion he had for you. But when I found out what you did to him, I was furious." Rebecca paused, her gaze steady. "But then I realized something. None of us is perfect, and we all have regrets. The difference is whether we take responsibility for them." The room was silent, heavy with unspoken emotions. I saw a flicker of vulnerability cross Sarah's face. She took a shaky breath. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I gave up everything for a dream." Rebecca shrugged, her tone shifting. "Honestly, I don't care what you do. What I do care about is this: you've let things slip out of your control, and I won't let you back into Ryan's life." Her voice hardened, her determination clear. "He's mine now, and you don't want to see how crazy I'll get if you try to interfere." Sarah stared at her, stunned. Rebecca stood and walked back to me, taking my hand. I found my voice and spoke firmly. "Rebecca is right. She belongs to me, and I to her. We're going to marry, have kids, and love each other fully. There's no place for you in my life anymore, Sarah." Sarah nodded faintly, as if she finally understood. Without another word, she left, disappearing into the cold evening. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The fallout from Eric's arrest was swift and public. News of the fraud we uncovered made headlines, and by the end of the year, the demand for our firm's services nearly doubled. We expanded rapidly, adding new staff to handle the influx of business. Rebecca and I married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. The day was simple but perfect, a celebration of love built on trust and resilience. We honeymooned in North Queensland, spending 2 blissful weeks on golden beaches, soaking in the sunlight and dreaming about our future. When we returned home, we settled into a routine of work, love, and planning the life we wanted together. Rebecca agreed to stop taking birth control, and we waited to see what the future would bring. 9 months later, our daughter, Sarah, was born. It felt poetic, like life had come full circle, offering us something new and beautiful. Years turned into decades. Rebecca and I built a life full of love, laughter, and adventure. We raised 4 children, welcomed 6 grandchildren, with another on the way, and traveled the world together. Our love grew deeper with each passing year, even as time began to take its toll. One evening, Rebecca held my hand tightly, her tears falling softly against my chest. "I'm scared, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know there's not much time left. I can feel my body shutting down." I kissed her forehead, my own tears falling. "I know," I said quietly. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here the whole time. That's the only thing that gives me strength," she replied, her voice barely audible. The next day, our children came with their families, filling the house with warmth and love. Rebecca was weaker, but her smile was as radiant as ever. Surrounded by those she loved most, she left us peacefully, her hand in mine. 6 months after Rebecca's passing, I found myself sitting at our favorite cafe, sipping coffee. It had become a comforting ritual, a way to feel close to her memory. I often carried pictures and videos of her, little glimpses of our life together that eased the loneliness. As I stared out the window, lost in thought, a shadow fell over me. A voice broke the silence, one I hadn't heard in over 30 years. "Ryan." I looked up, startled. It was Sarah, older, grayer, but unmistakably her. For a moment, I was speechless, seeing the woman I had once loved, now a stranger. "Sarah," I said finally, gesturing to the seat across from me. She hesitated, then sat down. "I've thought about you often," she said quietly. "I've wondered, did I ruin the only true love I ever had?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. "No, I know I did. You don't need to say it." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. The years had given me perspective, and I no longer felt anger toward her, only a distant sadness for what might have been. We sat in silence for a long moment, 2 lives that had diverged so completely, sharing a fleeting intersection once more. Sarah looked at me, her expression raw and vulnerable. "I did hurt you, Ryan," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I hurt you badly, and for so long, I blamed you for everything. I let Eric convince me we were soulmates, that I was destined to be with him. But he tricked me, and every man since then, none of them have ever matched up to you." I stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. For years, I had hated her. The betrayal, the humiliation, it had consumed me for so long. But now, sitting across from me was not the confident, fiery Sarah I once knew, but a broken, sad woman who had never found real love. "Sarah," I said softly, my voice steady. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing her face. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You need to forgive yourself. Not all 6 marriages could have been as bad as Eric's. Surely, a couple of them were decent." She gave a shaky laugh, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Maybe," she murmured. "But none of them were you." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. For a moment, I was transported to the past, the Sarah I had fallen for, the woman I had once loved with everything I had. "Sarah," I said firmly, bringing us back to the present, "I can forgive you. But what happened between us is in the past, and it needs to stay there." Her head shot up, hope flickering again in her eyes. "Friends, then?" she asked cautiously. "We'll see, Sarah." "We'll see," I replied, leaving the door open just enough for closure, but not enough for anything more. She nodded, understanding the boundaries I was setting.